Ancient Egypt, the time of Cleopatra, the pyramids, pharaohs, hieroglyphics, and today I've got some facts about ancient Egypt I bet you didn't know. Number 6, Cleopatra was not Egyptian. That's right, the absolutely most famous woman in all of ancient Egypt wasn't Egyptian. She was in fact a member of the Ptolemaic dynasty, which is a Greek family descended from Ptolemy I. And I love any word or name that starts with a PT. True. Most of the leaders of that dynasty, which did rule Egypt, simply spoke Greek. Not Cleo though. She learned to speak Egyptian and cast herself as the reincarnation of Isis, the goddess of health, marriage, and love. 3 very popular things, but goddess or not, she was Greek. Number 5, Egyptian board games. It was a big thing in ancient Egypt, playing board games. Even Nefertiti and Tutankhamun spent their time doing just that. King Tut even had game boards buried with him in his tomb. A couple of popular games that people would play after they came home from a hard day's work were called Mehen and Senet. Sadly, historians aren't really sure how these games were played, which is a shame. I mean, people have admired so much about Egypt for 5,000 years that the games may have been pretty cool. And cool is just what you would want to be if the job you came home from after a hard day's work was... Number 4, honey slaves. Which might sound a little weird at first, but if you think about it, it makes perfect sense. Egypt is a hot country, and there are a lot of flies buzzing around, even around the pharaoh. And Pharaoh Pepi II was not fond of them, so he kept several naked slaves nearby whose bodies were smeared with honey. That's pretty much the suckiest job I've ever heard of in my life. So, do the flies get stuck in the honey and die, or how does it work?
I don't know.
You know? Okay. Number 3, pharaohs were often overweight. Today's pictures of pharaohs, queens, and other prominent Egyptians are not quite as realistic as you might think. Examinations of mummies have shown that some were pretty unhealthy, overweight, and even had diabetes, which, like honey slaves, makes sense, as their diet consisted mostly of beer, wine, bread, and honey. A lot of sugar. Number 2, pyramid workers and protests. Contrary to what most people think, the pyramid builders were not slaves. They were permanent employees of the pharaoh and were paid for their work, and they were not afraid to protest to assert their rights. Now, several times we see that when pyramid workers were not paid on time, they would go to the temple and just sit outside of it until they got their money. Nonviolent resistance. Nice. Number 1, killed by a hippopotamus. There is a theory about the death of King Tutankhamun, and yes, it involves a hippopotamus. Egyptians hunted hippos for sport, and King Tut was no exception. His corpse shows that he suffered from a wound which may have been a bite from a hippopotamus. Definitely a serious injury. There are also statues in his tomb showing him throwing harpoons and spears and stuff like that, so maybe his death was just a hunting accident. Okay, that last one is not a fact, it's only a maybe, but it's a good maybe. And that's it for this week's Top List, but come back next Sunday to see another one right here at British Pathé. And click here to see last week's Top List.